Yeah, so today's topic is work from home. So COVID started this new movement in work from home sometime around mid-March. You guys and ladies can confirm that. But a lot of people are starting to wonder, is it really here to stay? And if we look at the commercial real estate market, is it starting to take a hit? There's other things going on in the world right now that might be changing that or encouraging people to work from home or changing the way that cities are used. But we've all been in this area of remote technologies for virtual desktops, such as Citrix desktops and just flexible working, being able to log on and work from anywhere. But we've seen an absolute explosion in this market since mid-March, and a lot of organizations are still full-time working from home. Many of them may be starting to rotate hours back into the office, but they're starting to question whether or not they need that commercial real estate going forward. As you can imagine, what if you were a small business owner and you had 15,000 square foot of office space, a half of a floor in a building or something like that? All of a sudden you start to scratch your head and you say, do I really need that office space? My users, I've got the technology to see that they are productive from home. So when that lease comes up, are they going to renew? Are they going to trim back their office space and invest in technologies and that can help users continue to work from home? And so that's where we see ourselves. So I want to ask the panel and see who wants to respond first. Do you think that this is just a flash in the pan, or do you think that the work from home movement is truly being transformed as of this year going forward? Are we seeing a major trend in work from home? Anybody want to jump in on that?
I can.
All right.
I can.
Theresa Miller.
So I think the first thing that's happening right now is you have some managers that were very fond of keeping track of their employees, seeing those butts in seats, for a lack of better words, right? And so I think they're going through a mindset shift right now. I think some of them want people back in the office, but I do think that a lot of employees want that flexibility. I have talked to so many people that feel long-term there's no way they would go back to the office. And so I think those leaders or managers that are now slowly getting insights into how productive their employees can be, even without knowing exactly when they're sitting at their desk, is part one. And part two, I think employees are going to be a voice for that long-term. Not everyone's going to want it. And I think people are going to listen, and there's so much more depth to that, but I don't want to hog the floor here. So I'll stop there and let somebody else grab it.
I agree with that. We've also got a special, and we've got people in from multiple countries here: Argentina, Germany. Doug's in Germany. We've going across Brazil, multiple time zones here. In the U.S., we're seeing civil unrest in cities. Are cities past their prime? So you start to wonder: are they past their prime? People realize they can work from home. Is it safe? We're starting to see real estate, even the residential market, starting to transform, and not getting political in those areas, but these are disruptors that are going to change our industry going forward. Doug, do you see that? Yep.
Well, Germany is completely different. If you walk around Berlin right now, it seems like Berlin before. There's a little bit less people on the streets, but not really. I mean, it's pretty much back to normal. Now, the Berliners and the Germans tend to not be as, let's say, revolutionary as the Americans. American culture, I believe, is born in revolution, right? We're independent people. We do what we want to do. It's the Germans are more rule followers. So when all COVID hit, the Germans sort of said, okay, let's stay home, where I think in America it's probably a little bit different from what I've seen on TV and what have you. So we haven't been hit as hard as, let's say, America has, right? But that being said, I agree with some of the stuff Theresa said. First and foremost, I've never worked from an office except for when I was a consultant. And then you would come in the morning, you would get your work orders, and out you would go, right? Then you'd go to wherever you had to be. So I've never had the experience of having a cubicle and sitting next to somebody. But I've also always found that I was more productive at home because I was uninterrupted. I got to work when I wanted to work, which was basically all the time. But if I needed to, if I felt like taking a nap, I could take a nap and then work late at night, or what have you, right? But I was a little bit different. I was a self-starter in that sense, and I loved what I did, so it was easy, and I still do, of course. But I think when you're together, you have a collaboration level that you can't get when you're away. Zoom is nice, but come on, I bet everyone's a little bit tired of Zoom or GoToMeeting or video calls. It's not the same as being able to hang out with somebody. And if you've had the privilege of being able to hang out with your buddies in person, I think you felt a lot different than you did when you saw them over a video call, right? So I think that we do want to go back to work, right? Some people at first, especially, we're gun shy right now. It's like getting hit by a baseball in the face or in a car accident or whatever, falling off a horse. Do you get back on right away? You probably take a little bit of time. But I believe that humans are totally creatures of habit. And I think that we'll all go back to the way we were in due time. Absolutely. But I think it'll take time. I don't think things will be immediately the way they were. I think, at first some people are going to work from home, but I think eventually, give it, 3-4 years, we'll be back to the way it always was.
Yeah.
My example too is 9/11. After 9/11, America was, hey, with this, this and this, we're completely back to the way we were prior to 9/11, minus all the, the security that we have nowadays, right? But we always resort back to who we are.
It's interesting. I wasn't going to go here first, but trade shows have changed, and a lot of people that are attending, and now we have dozens and dozens of people that have logged in watching us, and we want to encourage questions from the audience, by the way. So think about things. If you've got something relevant or even irrelevant, just put the question in the box there, and we'll get to it. Trade shows have changed. I remember 9/11. I was doing some work for ScriptLogic back then. It was so 2001, and I was planning on headed down to, it was either Tech Ed or that Outlook show that Microsoft used to do in Orlando, and I had my ticket to fly, and the show it seems like it was a couple weeks after 9/11, and people were, including myself, really skittish about getting on a plane because they'd opened back up, so that's a 9-hour drive. And so I was like, I've already committed and I don't have anything else to do. I'm going to rent a car and drive down. So I did, and got down there, and the show was a ghost town. They probably shouldn't have had it in retrospect. I think they regretted having it. A lot of the exhibitors complained that the foot traffic wasn't there. It was really just a ghost town. And you started to wonder, are shows ever going to come back? And we can all answer that question. They came back bigger than ever eventually. And what had been a small show there, eventually, I believe that was a Tech Ed. It ended up, Tech Ed has now the Microsoft Big Partner Conference, of not that one, but the other one. What's the one that escapes me? The Microsoft Ignite is now bigger than that. That's more or less Tech Ed rolled forward under several different names. Had been bigger than ever, up until last year, with tens of thousands of people there. And it was actually in Orlando last year. And I thought about that as I was in the Orlando Convention Center across the street. Boy, shows came back with a vengeance. And I believe they will come back. Citrix Synergy was going to go virtual. And we've got, and now it looks like it's not even going to happen at all this year, unless you guys have heard different. And VMworld is coming up in just a couple of weeks virtually. What are your guys' thoughts on shows and what you're seeing out there? We don't get to see each other.
I think it's totally changed the dynamic. And, I'll be the first to say that there's a lot of aspects of virtual that I just frankly don't enjoy. The social aspect of things is the biggest, especially when you talk about conferences and shows and being able to unplug from the day-to-day life and go somewhere and have an experience that's just not there with anything that you're going to do virtual. So as much as I'm an advocate for people working from home and getting the flexibility to work as they want, when they want, and all those factors, there is also something to be said about concentrating focus, concentrating people in an area where you have a specific task, whether that's a conference, that's a workshop, a study group, whatever that may be. There's a lot to be said about physical proximity to people and the synergy that happens when, to use the expression, the minds are melding, right? The minds are being put together, and you're getting more value out of these minds being put together in the same room with whiteboards and all the things that you get for brainstorming. So I think that part of things, and the positive thing, like you were talking about with 9/11, people are excited and anxious even to get back to a state where we can do that again. Yeah. So I think the enthusiasm factor when these shows start to be available again, I think it's going to be higher than it was even going into 2020.
Yeah, I do agree. And what I'm seeing, so the COVID thing was hitting me 1 week prior to the World Expo. And we have been running World Expo now for 10 times, and it's been packed. But we didn't see any, 50% increase in the number of attendees just because people were working at home. And we did have some increase, of course. But what I'm seeing now is that it's even harder now to get people on board to webinars and events because there is so many events going on. We just have next, we're going to have VMware coming up, and there's so many meetings and there's so many virtual webinars. So it's really hard now to getting people join together. So I'm really, really looking forward to meeting people again.
Yeah, I know we're talking about events, but if I could go back to the first question you asked, and that's, is it here to stay? And Theresa was talking about a very important part, which is, company culture and managerial styles and how to interface with their employees and make sure that they get productivity out of them. I actually think that what we're experiencing now for a lot of IT professionals and a lot of line of business professionals, whether it's accounting, directly interfacing with the ERP, whatever it may be in the business, what we're experiencing right now is not actually an accurate representation of what the future state of work from home will look like. And so it will put a bad taste in a lot of managers' mouths that think, oh, I'm not getting as much productivity out of them. Oh, I have to constantly supervise them virtually, which takes more time, from me, and so on and so forth. Because the vast majority, and I don't know if you guys see this across your customers and geographies as well, but the vast majority of working professionals in the middle class, the knowledge worker class that can work from home, the vast majority of them are family people that are also impacted with their kids not being in school right now. So you have dual working households where both mom and dad are working. Then they have their kids that are supposed to be in school so that they can go work. Now they have their kids at home. They're having to do virtual learning with their kids. They're completely distracted, not able to put the focus on their company. And so the productivity impact isn't there where it would be there if, for example, they were given the opportunity to work from home 2 days a week or 3 days a week with their kid in school and have that be more of the flexible work style that we've always dreamed about. So I think that there's going to be a little bit of reassessment of how much can we support work from home once the kids actually get back to school.
So just to kind of add to that, Dane, though, so while there could, to me, I don't think that there's the productivity hit that I think you implied. Just because kids are home from school, I actually think you're still going to have parents being more productive because their day is a big blur. So sure, I got to take, let's say, 2 hours out of my daytime for my kids or whatever the case might be. I still have the ability to go work into the evening. And so that's that mindset shift that I was getting at with managers is it's the outcomes. It's totally about outcomes. And I think if they can get past seeing their employees in seats, they're going to be much more flexible to knowing that their employees are productive for one, but also still that work from home. Now, to the other point of we like people need people. I think that's something that also came up here, right? We build off each other's energy. We are more creative that way. I almost think work long-term is going to be somewhat of a hybrid model for lack of a better term. There will be office days, right? There will be team meeting day in the office where we all get together. And then there will be these days where we get that flexibility we need to deal with family and dentist appointments and still work whenever we want throughout that day.
Yeah, I agree with Theresa. I think that so I'll give you an example. My wife works for a company and she's a manager at a company and she is so busy nowadays, it's incredible. And she's busy with emails coming in, Slack conversations coming in because all her employees are doing nothing but working. And so they're sending a message at 10 p.m. at night. And when you do deal with a technology like Teams or Slack, you almost used to have an instant gratification, right? You're immediately, that person's supposed to reply. So the productivity, from what I'm seeing out of her alone, and within my company too, and within me, but it's always been that way for, I mean, we're like I agree with Dane. I think we're a different breed than the average worker, right? That goes to work 8 to 5, does their whatever they do, and then goes home. But I think that Teresa's right, is that now you can work anytime. So when you have that second, you're like, oh, I'll respond to this email, right? And then the person that receives the email, oh crap, I'll respond to this email. So it never stops, right? And this is actually something I've been arguing with her about, because I sort of want her to hang out with me.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree with that. So there has to be boundaries, and in some countries that they're looking at instituting things that after business hours you're not required to answer emails.
Well, some companies are shutting it down. I think it was like Daimler Chrysler or one of those big auto companies in Germany. When you go on vacation, they literally disconnect your internet. Like you can't.
That's a European thing.
Well,
Europe is completely different. America, yeah.
For furloughs as well. So if you're going to get supplemental income, for example, you're getting furloughed, so it's similar to being unemployed. The company has an obligation to shut off your access to all assets. So even if it's a 1 week furlough that's instituted on a monthly or quarterly basis. So one of my friends sells silicon and sells to a lot of big tech companies. Their company instituted furloughs because there's such a supply chain shortage in silicon. They don't have the revenue to support all these sales guys trying to go out and sell stuff to customers. One, they can't even go and visit the customers right now, but that's a different story. So they're doing furloughs, and he said this is the first time in his working life where they've actually unplugged his access to all technology for a 1 week period of time, so that he has his furlough, so that he gets the benefits and whatever, and then he comes back and plugs back in. It's so bizarre. It's really weird.
It is. I didn't even know what a furlough was until COVID. I had no clue. That was all new. Just one more quick point, Doug, it looked like you might want to say something, but so the unplugging thing. So I truly live by this. I have it in my email signature. Even though we're all working different hours, my working hours may not be your working hours. Please do not feel obligated to reply outside of your working hours. So that applies to time zones, but that also applies to the mom and the dad that have more responsibility right now because they're teaching their kids at home, or they're caring for, their elderly parent or whatever the case might be. So, Doug, even though we want to reply, I think there does have to be a level of respect to others, right? Know that we may not get that response no matter what.
Of course. I think it goes back to human nature, though, and it's sort of the theory. And in the influence world, there's a great book about it. It's called Influence, but it's the theory of reciprocity, if I can spit out that word. Where if I give you something, you give me something, right? And this applies with knowledge, or applies with emails, or applies, with something as silly as emails. When you receive one at night, you feel like you need to return one at night. If it's instilled in our DNA, you can mess with people. It's fun.
There's also a status factor that even subconsciously comes in there. I remember, years back, I'd be working and, I'd put my laptop down at 6 o'clock, go have some dinner and stuff with the kids, be watching TV at 8:30, get an email from not my boss, but my boss's boss about something that was probably completely irrelevant and didn't need to be responded to right away. But I'm like, oh, this is my boss's boss. I have to respond. So there's a subconscious thing that happens where people are just like, even though I'm not supposed to be working all the time, I'm working all the time.
Yeah, but COVID didn't start that. That's in general, and that's forever, right?
Hey, gang, we got a few questions coming in here. So do you mind if we kind of pause on that and address some of the questions? All right.
You tell me to stop talking, Ray?
That's all right. So we've got Jane here just posed this question, wanted me to ask you guys this. And this is more of a management question versus technology. But if people don't want to return to the office due to fear or whatever it is, will management look upon those as the first to go? if redundancies, are out there. I guess there's been some debate on that on LinkedIn, and she's interested in the panel's view.
I'm one to say that it's going to be entirely case specific, company specific, department specific. I think that just like performance evaluations, if the manager doesn't know what their employees are doing and the value that they're contributing, it's really easy for them to make stupid decisions like, oh, this person doesn't want to come back to the office, I'm going to find an excuse to write them up for some performance related issue. So I'm a big fan of the relationship factor, not just in technology, but just in life and business in general. And I think having a quality relationship with your management and vice versa, the managers having a quality relationship with their employees to understand those nuances of, I hate to even use the word fear, but just, a little bit of trepidation when it comes into a public setting. You have to know your people, and you have to understand what's right for your people and what your people need to feel comfortable in that workplace setting. So I think it's largely going to be case specific. Some managers are just nimrods, and they're going to use any excuse that they can to get rid of people. So
it's culture.
Some insight here from Norway. So Norway was the second country that shut down after Denmark, and everything now is open up. We have the children's school, and we have the kindergarten. Everything is up and running, but the people has the choice now when they want to go to the office. And there's a lot of people wanting to stay more days at home and then go to the office once or twice a week, simply because they save like 3 hours just in commute going to work, right? And we have the biggest telecom in Norway. They have 50,000 employees in 12 countries. They announced that the people are allowed to decide whenever they go back to work, right? So what I've been doing some research now for this on Twitter in terms of what kind of incentive do you get from your employee to build up a proper work from home office? Because working from a laptop with a small camera down at the side of the keyboard, sitting on the kitchen counter, that is not something for a long-term work from home business, right? So you need to have a proper desk, you need to have a proper chair. What happens if you don't have that? Then you have to go to whatever you call it, get your back down. And there's even rules in law, actually, in I think it was Sweden and the Netherlands, that the employees is responsible for your working environment, independent on where that work environment is.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I think just to kind of go back to Jane's question, I think that there is value in finding time to be in the office. To Dane's point about culture, it may not work for every office, and I think that sometimes that might mean change of employment too. It might be too soon to make these decisions. Obviously, I think most of us are still remote and will be for some time. But I think keep an open mind to having some office time to make sure you get that people interaction. But I don't think it needs to be every day.
Yeah. I think some companies are also a little bit scared. You have legal liability too, right? So, there's conversation around when do we start sending our employees back out to visit customers? So if Dane works for me, God help him, and I say, Dane, you need to go visit the company X, and he goes get sick, who's liable? Can he come back and sue me, right? And especially if you're American, that's very easy to sue anybody. And if you're in other countries, you also have regulations and rules and laws and what have you. And I think companies are very worried about that. I've heard conversation around this also, from the work from, not just from sending them out to work, but also just to bring them back into the office. We cannot get these as managers and executives get these people sick or make them feel like they need to do it. Then they get sick, and then they say, the only reason I got sick is because I was forced to go back into the office. Now we have a big problem, right?
Yeah,
and I know that a lot of executive teams and are very conscious of that.
Yeah,
and rightfully so.
User productivity.
I want to bring back this conference question. Can I make a comment on that one?
Yeah.
You know, conferences are interesting. I agree with what everyone says. I don't like virtual conferences. At IGEL, we've been very successful. We've had thousands of people join our digital disrupt thing, which is pretty cool. You know, how many people join and stick around, I don't know. But what I like about conferences is I know each one of you guys. I remember meeting Dane at a conference. I remember meeting Theresa at a conference. I remember meeting Eirik in Norway at a conference, right? And the reason I go to those shows is not for the sessions. I don't do that anymore. I go to the exhibit hall and I go to drink beer with you guys. It's not even about the beer, right? It's just about hanging out. And when you leave those conferences, you know, like, I'm an old Citrix guy, right? Citrix is my blood, so to speak. So when I leave that, you're like, go Citrix. You know, you have that power about, you know, go Liquidware, wherever you are. And when you don't get off Zoom or go to meeting and say, oh yeah, I can't wait for the next Zoom call. Nobody does that, right? They're like, oh, I'm so glad I don't have to watch this video anymore. So that's
No,
what you
I
miss.
think you've
You
got
miss
I know
that
you've got a
piece.
point there. It's about relationships, and you
It's
know
all
we've all
about
been
relationships.
close to Citrix, all of us, and we've all been into the headquarters probably, right? And ironically, I found this very ironic. About 10 years ago or so, when you got a job with Citrix, they had a mandate that you had to be in the office so many days of the week. Almost all average employees, average management had to be in the office so many days of the week, right? Not that their management's average, but that you had to be in the office certain days of the week. I found that ironic because Citrix is the one that more allows you to work from home with their technology than anyone else probably in the world. And so, yeah, if you've ever looked for job postings with Citrix, and this was before I worked at Liquidware, not lately have I looked, but they all say must report into the office, almost every mid-management position.
Yeah.
So, you know, were they on the leading curve of this? So they saw this, and it's interesting to look at how they started to allow even their own employees more and more time to work from home, I believe, in recent years. I was in a meeting not long ago with them, not long ago, let's say 5 years ago, and they had worked from home. They were more conducive to work from home than ever. They had these cafes throughout the building. Have any of you seen these where you go in and these the ad hoc rooms where you go in there and they're like the hang space that we're used to at the shows, and they look like a cafe, but there's no order counter, maybe some vending machines and some things. So you literally, when I had a meeting with some Citrix people, they didn't have a full-time office, some of them then you met with them in a booth. It looked like a booth at a restaurant. And so you gathered around them and met there. I believe that we'll start to see the transformation of real estate that way. They were on the leading edge of that. And a lot of technology companies, Facebook, Google, you know, they all have the nap pods and things like that for their flex space. So I think you'll see the emergence of that. We'll probably come out looking better as a whole from work from home because of this being a burst scale type technology year for everyone, and then it'll settle into reality into the coming years. Productivity, organizations want to know that their users are productive, and I want to move the conversation to that a bit. We were asked very shortly after the start of this in March, can Stratosphere tell me how productive my users are? So you get into a bit of conundrum there, right? We don't want to be in the business of being a net nanny, saying every URL that you know your employees are going to. But we found a bit of a compromise, we believe, and the reports have been well received. A user productivity report now is available in Stratosphere, and it can tell you what line of business apps, and you can name what those apps are if you want, and have and get a rule of thumb. Are your users in your line of business apps? Are they active throughout the day? And it kind of gives you a meter in there without giving you the net nanny approach. You guys, what do you guys think of not only that, but maybe the extreme of going to a net nanny? Let me see what you're doing every hour of the day. Are we headed to that?
Dane's like laughing hard over there, so I just want to know what's going through his head.
I'm laughing because never in a previous year before 2020 had I received so many inquiries from different customers and partners about Big Brother technologies as I have in 2020. Yeah, and so it seems like every single company is taking the massive sledgehammer approach and saying, our managers aren't effective in actually managing outcomes. So we're going to do the Big Brother approach and say, well, now we're going to shadow everybody over their shoulder and see if they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I got so many inquiries about this that I was like, I remember there was a book about this. I'm going to go read the book about this. And you guys are never going to guess what book I decided to read, but I went and picked up George Orwell's 1984, which talks about Big Brother is always watching. And that book just really illuminated like this mindset that some of these managers that were putting this requirement on their IT department to say, we don't really trust our employees. We don't really know how to measure their outcomes. So we need to be watching them constantly through all means of communication whatsoever. So can you give us the technology that does that? I just couldn't believe it. I was like, you guys are coming at this from the wrong angle altogether. You're coming at this from the wrong perspective. But how do you change that culturally with all of these line of business managers, most of which have no idea how to manage expectations and performance? That's the hard part, back to Theresa's point.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's my butts and seats comment. That's that mindset shift that I think is required. I mean, even a monitoring solution isn't gonna give you the full answer of what somebody did. It has to be about the outcomes.
Yeah. Do you think
I mean,
there's a balance?
I agree with that.
There's a balance that can be struck there? Some just the way that we're trying to do a Stratosphere, give you some information just about the apps
I
open?
think some of it is helpful. Absolutely. It gives you a foundation. But interesting, even pre-COVID, I don't remember where I read this. I think it was just something on social where this manager almost fired somebody because they were never using this was old. It was Microsoft Link. You've got this employee who's never on Microsoft Link, and the monitoring tool says they're never on there, so they're not working, so we should get rid of them. Well, thankfully, they took the time to actually look at the outcomes. What is the work that's happening? And they didn't end up letting the employee go. So I think monitoring tools can complement. I think, like Dane said, monitoring tools, I think, have blown up. I think people are implementing them like crazy. It's a great business to be in right now, but it's not the whole answer. You have to look at the person and the work they're doing.
I think you have to change how you monitor, or if you're going to change how you work, you have to change how you manage, right?
Yes.
You can't walk in there with the same opinion of, you do this and this and this, right? Just like we talked about, you're going to work in different hours of the day. To me, it's always been, and I've been lucky because I've had good bosses, but it's always been not about when I do it or how I do it. It's about getting it done, right? I had an employee that worked in Brazil and for me, and he calls me up one day. He goes, "Do you mind if I take the day off and watch the World Cup?" I was like, "Well, first of all, what's the World Cup, American?" And second of all, I was like, "I don't care what you do, just get your job done on time," right? And so what, those people, if you're going to make layoffs, get rid of middle management. They're useless anyway in most situations. So,
well, Theresa, in the case of that employee not having Link open, the reality is that employee was probably more productive than every other employee on the team because they didn't have Link up.
Because they didn't have Link open.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Teams is the root of all evil.
We've got a question from Tony here, and I'm going to unmute Tony so he can kind of bring it back up. It brings us back a step or two here, but he was talking about Onsite again and consulting. So Tony, can you hear us?
Hello?
Hey, Tony, we can hear you.
Hey, Dane, Doug, and crew. How you guys doing?
Good.
Guys and gals.
Good.
So this is more about the consulting world, Dane, and the question really is, some customers had never really trusted that you were getting your job done properly if they didn't see you on site at your $250 to $300 an hour rate. Other customers were fine with that. A lot of it had to do with your relationship with specific customers, but let's talk about the actual companies. You and I have shared a couple of those in the past, right? But
I think I know your last name.
Yeah, exactly. So those companies don't always believe that remote is the right approach, right? They want to put kind of, butts in the seats out at the customer. I think nowadays, like if you were to go to Qualcomm and say, "Hey, we want to come on site," we're like, "You're going to be the only one there," because we have 40,000 people working from home. So you go ahead and go on site, see if you can find anybody to talk to. There's just nobody there. So the question really is, do you think that that'll become more of the norm? Do you think this is forcing the the change to remote consulting being the norm?
I think if I answer just from my perspective, what does it look like for me? I think the shortest answer to retain that value conversation with the customers has to do with infusion. And that's probably the best word that I could think of for what exactly we're talking about. In a pre-COVID world, like February or even like 2019, the way that you infuse yourself as a customer into the as a consultant into the customer's culture and into their environment is physically being where they are in their environment, in their office setting, and being an integral part of their team. Now with virtual work from everything, the way that you infuse yourself into that culture and that environment is being where they are and where they're conducting their work, which most of the time means that you're remote, you're in the same virtualized environment that their IT people are in, you're in the same collaboration tools that their IT people are in, whether that's Slack, Teams, what have you. And then that, you know, in terms of what they're paying for time like they were before in an office setting becomes time in a virtual office, virtual collaboration setting where you're interacting on certain days or periods of time in the week on a staff augmentation type of basis. The other type of project consulting wise, which Eirik is very familiar with this because he does, you know, this is how most of his automation workshops go. It's product based. You know, you have an outcome, you have sprints, you have stuff that you're working towards. And as long as you're getting those outcomes completed, you're getting those sprints completed, your value from a consulting perspective is still the same, whether you're physically on site or remote. So I actually look forward to post-COVID where I can go visit my clients in person because there's an in-person element that's lacking. But I've also seen how not just myself, but other consultants have been able to make the shift with their customers by establishing that value transition to infusion, but like actually being infused as part of their team.
Yep. Yeah, I think
agree with
that initial touch, you know, if you can establish that rapport, then you can be kind of trusted to be, you know, offsite, and you know, you've got like you said, that infused or that trusted partner connection with your customer. So exactly. Yeah, I'm wondering if that's even harder for some consulting firms now that are trying to do business when they can't go knock on that door, right?
Yep, exactly.
For sure.
Eirik, you work 100% remotely. What's it like for you? What would do you have customers that worry about this? Because you're not going on site from Brazil, right?
Exactly. So I was about to say that I think for us that works in the consulting business, I think it's easier now to get remote work than it used to be prior to COVID, right? So I have a lot of friends in the US, a lot of us that are working as self-employed. And, you know, the primary contact that you have with the customer is FaceTime, you know, on site with the customer. And then, you know, you go from there and then maybe you go into the customer environment one day a week and the rest you do work from home. Now, for people that works 100% remotely like myself, it's really hard to get the first step inside of the door, basically because, you know, you cannot go anywhere, everything is closed. But even if you could go, for me, so if I could go, I wouldn't visit a customer in the US and then, you know, that didn't work out, just fly back and, you know, $2,000 out the window. So what I'm seeing now, and I think this will change, especially for us working as remote consultants, because now it's more accepted that we are actually working remotely, and I see more and more work coming in this way. So I think it's a good thing for us.
Let's stay on this consultant thread because I want to talk about a couple of case studies. So while I ramble on, I want you as consultants and advisors to think about since March. Think of a case study, just a oral case study. You don't have to name the company, but how you helped, you know, a company work from home. And I'll go first. How Liquidware helped the Washington Municipal Rail System. They were already a customer of ours and Citrix, but they in mid-March decided that they wanted another few thousand admin users to work from home very quickly. And so they called us for additional licenses. They started running Profile Unity on every desktop. And within a week, they made a shift and they had those employees sent to work from home and log on to their new Citrix desktop, we were able to share the user environment across there, where as soon as they logged on, they had their familiar profile in place, even across OS. So some of those were Windows 7 to a Windows 10 like OS, and it enabled them to burst scale. And then we helped them monitor that, of course, with Stratosphere to know the user experience of that. So that's one way we helped in the situation. I just want to quickly see if any of you can talk about some ways that you helped customers throughout there. And who wants to go first?
I have a point on this one.
Yep.
Eric, go.
It's our second since I went first.
No, Eric,
Eric.
I've talked a lot.
Okay, so I having a customer working mostly full time. So what we saw when they started to shut down in the US is that we instantly have to spin up, 30 new sites, across the US, literally over the weekend, right? So luckily, I've been doing my automation work there prior, so it was pretty easy for us to get this going. But even though we had 13 data centers that we have to do this, and so that passed, we scaled up and we got more hardware and so on and so on. And the dollar was really easy. So okay, we just need a terabyte or more memory, no problems, just go buy it, And another thing we saw was that change management was completely different. So we just, okay, we need to have Teams. Okay, we need to roll it out. Let's get it out tomorrow. And we did that. And the next weekend, okay, now we need to integrate OneDrive with Teams. Let's roll that out. So we did that. But, all those have an effect, as you know, on the hardware. So, there's a lot of stuff going on.
Your primary platform was Citrix XenApp or Zen Desktop or both? Or
Yeah, Citrix. We did have VDI, but the problem was that, the VDI doesn't scale that way, especially when you have to double or triple the number of users in terms of over the weekend. So what we decided to do was that we took all the, the 90% of the most commonly used apps. So we got the stats, we saw the apps that we needed. We already had that scripted. So we just basically pushed out a desktop to each and every data center to get closest to those customers inside of the company. And then for the special type of applications for finance, legal, and all those kind, they had to open a ticket to get that app prioritized to be packaged and provided inside of, VDI. So that's the way we handle that in that company.
Nice. Yeah. What's that company do? What business are they in?
Oh, they're in chemical, oil and chemicals.
Oil and chemical. Yeah. Who else?
So we had a great one.
Yep.
You're looking this way.
Doug?
Okay.
Yep,
So yeah, at IGEL, I'll give us our example because I don't like the drinking the own champagne stuff. I like eating my own dog food. It's more realistic and it's real. And at IGEL, we one day all of our developers are inside, and the next day they all have to go home. Well, developers tend to not be remote workers. They sit next to each other all 9 yards. We were able to transition in one day the entire development staff of 100 some people to work from home. Some of them took their thin clients home. Some of them took their UD Pocket, that little USB stick, went home, plugged it into the machines. They were able to thin link back in, which is a solution that allowed to connect back into Linux boxes. It's sort of like Citrix for Linux in a way. And then also they utilize our Citrix system for line of business, Outlook, Office type of applications. But within one day, due to what we do for a business, remote, devices, endpoints, operating system, it was very simple for us. It was really, really a great case study. It's actually on our website. Not that I have any clue where it is, but it's
great. And the IGEL stuff's great with compliance too, because you keep a walled 100%. Off area of a desktop or whatever to
Oh, you can stick that thing in, reboot their machine. You don't touch their machine.
Yep.
And away you go. But it worked for us.
In compliance. Yep. So, separate desktop. Yeah. That's great.
100%.
Go ahead, Theresa. Any experience?
Well, I think it's interesting. So I play in the cloud a lot these days. And so while I don't exactly have a firsthand experience, just in talking with companies, I found that the cloud was kind of the way to scale. Eirik talked about Teams. Teams adoption has been astronomical. WVD adoption's been astronomical. And And the other piece that I don't think we really talked about here today was even the security element. Like security breaches are kind of on the rise, and like a technology like IGEL, like I think your case study is probably really, really valid, Doug, is you kind of took the people going home and using their home device to do work, right? They're in a secured platform because now IT departments aren't dealing with those devices. So those are some of the stories that I've heard a lot of, and you know, they're very real and very impacting. But thank goodness, I think in a lot of cases that we have the cloud to lean on for this, because it scales. And it scales in a fantastic way. So
yeah,
we could have a whole conversation just about WVD and how good COVID affected that beast.
Yeah.
Right.
I know.
I mean, how lucky did they get? Not that WVD is not a great thing; it totally
Right.
is. But it was
Citrix on
like it
Azure.
was released at the perfect right time.
It was. It
really
was
awesome.
Dane?
I think the experience that I had was that, you know, the customers that already had a roadmap and a strategy for some form of virtualized remote working just kind of hit the accelerator on that, and their adoption went through the roof. The customers that didn't have a strategy or didn't have a roadmap for that, or were, you know, more of the laggards and saying, oh, we're going to look at virtualization in the next couple years, VDI in the next couple years, those are the ones that really floundered through the transition. The best case study that I have, the customer that I really enjoyed working with through this was architecture, engineering, and construction firms. So they're dealing with CAD images and very high-end graphical computation models and things like that. So I like those types of customers because they're kind of like the gamers of the IT industry, if you think about it that way. They have some really high-powered workstations. They have some really high-end requirements, similar in oil and gas, but they need a lot of horsepower from the systems. And so we had a customer that was in a small initial pilot of 20 or so users, and that pilot was going really well. And we had, you know, an 18-month strategy to get them rolled out wall to wall across their 300+ employee organization. And because of the resource requirements, they were going to be looking at a pretty expensive Azure bill to drive these high-end workstations over that transitionary period. COVID hit, their COO, their CFO, and their CEO just basically took the budget off the project and said, do whatever you need to do to get everybody migrated because they're not coming back into the office. And so they immediately went from a small scale 20-person pilot that was very successful up to that point, but they just hit the accelerator for adoption and had over 150 engineers and these high-end workers that require pretty high-end performance on the platform in, you know, virtually overnight. I mean, almost overnight. The case study, and I will definitely not name this customer, but it's a good example of what not to do. There's, you know, what to do, what not to do. And the case study of what not to do was a customer that I got brought in after the fact, where they're like, hey, we recognize that this work from home thing is probably going to be here to stay. This is actually about a month into it. And they're like, oh, it's going to be here at least 6 months. Well, as it turns out, we're looking at more like 18 months now. But you know, they were like a month into it, and they made some really, really crucial decisions a month into it that I just was scratching my head and going, how in the world did anybody that cares about productivity or security ever sign off on this? And they literally took workstation class desktop PCs with the monitors, peripherals, and everything else, boxed them up for employees, sent them home with VPN access, and had them connected to their home networks over VPN, connected back into the office. These workstations that were never, ever, ever intended to leave what the security folks would think was the secured network, which is inside the four walls of the office building, where you can have intellectual property and things like that stored on these devices. Now those go home to probably the worst vulnerable environment that you can imagine, with kids downloading all kinds of things over all kinds of different technologies that basically give backdoor access to these corporate environments. So those are some good and bad examples, but you know, that customer, they made a knee-jerk reaction and were like, we need to get these people productive, send them home with their workstations, and then they realized just how bad of a decision that was. So we ended up helping them bring those workstations back use thin clients on the endpoint side, actually at the home, use the peripherals and the thin clients, and then remote into those workstations in the corporate office environment. So at least those devices that have that intellectual property are not sitting at home on the network with torrent and all kinds of other, home network security vulnerabilities. So
great use case. So this whole work from home is a brave new world. We've got compliance things and legal things that we'll have to think about going forward. And I think we've answered the question to a degree. Is work from home here to stay? I think we all agree that things have changed for now, but they'll eventually get back to a new type of a normal. Whether we're ready to burst scale again for the next emergency or whatever that we have, or pandemic, we'll be more, as a society, better prepared. But I hope that we get back to normal very quickly and get to see each other, because I sure do miss seeing all of you in person. The Unplugged series was meant to help fill this void of not getting to see each other, so we've at least accomplished that today. This is the closest we'll get for a while if you'll stick out your arms.
Are you doing group hug?
Yeah, somebody, Ray, take a little screen.
Can you make a noise?
Ray, use one of your hands and take a screen capture of that.
this is a COVID safe hug.
This is a big COVID hug. Yep. That's as close as we're going to get for a while. Ray, you want to bring us home? We're at the top of the hour. Yep, can't hear you.
You're muted, Ray.
Sorry, I was on mute there. We are past the hour. I want to be cognizant of everyone's schedule. There was one or two people out there that had maybe a question or a comment, but just going back here, you see the one slide we do have. There are places here where you can reach out to everyone. Feel free to reach out. I think everyone would be happy to if you reached out to them on social media. We talked about some of the communities. We have Liquidware, our own community, which is community.liquidware.com. We'll post a copy of the recording from today's event there. And so we invite you all to check that out and go from there. If you have any other questions or anything else, you can always address them to unplugged@liquidware.com. If you've got one for one of our panelists, we'll make sure we forward those questions and comments off to them. There were a lot of little questions and comments, saying, hey, great answer, thanks for the answer for each one of you guys. I just didn't want to interrupt the flow for each of those, but we also had some great, thanks for the great presentation. So there was quite a few people on and that really enjoyed this. So thank you all for your time. And we look forward to seeing you all on a future Unplugged session.
Yes, thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all the ones that submitted questions. Thank you, Tony, for chiming in. And I hope to see you all soon. Stay well.
All right, see y'all.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Thank you.